Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Oh, people are half awake. Miracle. Thank you for coming today. I know we all smell this lovely thing, so now we're going to practice temptation and concentrate on the lecture that's going to be given by our lovely Joe, who came back to us, and he's going to talk about love your enemies. So, as always, before we do, where's the book? We're gonna read a passage from the book A Happy Life and do our initial prayer. Make an agreement with yourself to carry out all your tasks in an orderly and unhurried fashion. The person who thinks highly of what he does gives it beauty and meaning, all the better to carry it out. All work is noble, no matter how insignificant it may be considered, or how humble. The universe and the worm, so different and even antagonistic, are both important in the divine scheme of things. Carry out each task with respect and satisfaction. So let's now close our eyes, elevate our thoughts to our Master Jesus and all the beloved friends present here today with us. Let's ask them to open our minds and our hearts for the lecture of today. And please inspire our friend Joe to give us the best of what he has learned through his studies. Thank you, so be it. Joe?
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Hope everyone is well. Always happy to see new faces, and may not be new faces because I've been away. As Raquel mentioned, I did not kind of come back. I was in Brazil for a while, and very happy to be here. See faces I don't recognize. At my age, also see peoples that I don't remember, but that's my problem. Let me start by waiting for Sandra to sit down. I'll start with a question for you guys. Who here believes there are kind of just beginning Spiritism or just don't know much about it? Good. Because today's lesson is the hardest you're going to hear. Because it's the hardest thing that Jesus has asked us to do, which is love thy neighbor and love thy enemies. Right? We know about the golden rule, right? Treat others as you would like to be treated yourself. We hear about love thy neighbor. But then Jesus goes further and says, love thy enemies. And at least for myself, I can attest that in current level of evolution, that's impossible to love all of our enemies and really love them and understand what love means. So this particular topic and this particular guidance that we get in the gospel from Jesus is a whole chapter in the gospel according to Spiritism. And if you don't have one, I do always recommend that you have a copy because it does provide so many enlightened views of how the gospel is still current to our day-to-day lives. And in the current situation that we live today, with the polarization, social media, we're divided in almost everything. Politics, beliefs in science or not science, beliefs on immigration or not immigration, right? We seem to be creating distance between ourselves. So it's very easy to fall into that echo chamber, that you're always paying attention to the people who think like you, who are like you, who are not your enemies, and somehow making everyone else kind of villains, idiots, trying to destroy us and so forth. And this goes, around the world, this is happening. It's happening in Brazil, it's happening in the US, Canada, Europe. It's really concerning. And this is why it's often so good for us to go back, deep in a quiet place in ourselves and just read the gospel and try to remind us of how simple the message is, but at the same time so difficult for us to execute it. We can do it sometimes, but it's not about doing it sometimes. It's doing it freely, spontaneously, and all the time. So I will read often from the gospel, according to Spiritism, because I find it very hard to write anything better than what I see here. So we start with the actual passage in the Bible that comes from Matthew chapter 5:20. And Jesus says, you have learned that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemies. So he's mentioning what people always say, right? At the time. Even some understanding that you might get from the Old Testament, when there was a lot of divisions, a lot of kind of conflicts that were described in there. But he continues with saying, but I say to you, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who persecute and malign you, so that you may be children of your Father who is in heaven, who makes the sun rise on the good and in the evil, and the rain fall on the just and the unjust. For if you love only those who love you, that's, just love the people who love me, what reward will you receive from it? If you're just doing the easy thing, right? It's often very easy to love people who love you. Do not the publicans also do that? And if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing that others do not? Do not the publicans do the same? I say to you that if your justice is not more abundant than that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Well, that's the essence of it, right? He makes reference to God our Father as the creator for all of us. We're all creatures of his creation. We're all, in that way, blessed and godly in our own ways, because we are from him. So how can we hate God? How can we hate the creation of God? Because the opposite of the love here is obviously hatred. In theory, seems simple. Love everyone. But how can we love somebody who has harmed us, who has harmed people that we love, that has even killed us, taken away all of our property, destroyed our homes, been in wars against us? How do we love them? And what good does that do for me? And in that sense, a lot of these answers are best explained by Spiritism than other traditional religions, because one of the key tenets of our belief is that of reincarnation and the laws of cause and effect. So much needs to be understood of what does it mean to love somebody now in respect to our past and in respect to our future. When I say ours, it's not just us, it's us and our enemies together. Because whether we like it or not, we have an attachment that will span multiple lives. Not every life, but it will span multiple lives. There is an affinity, there is a certain attraction that we have with spirits. And we tend to reincarnate with a subgroup of those same spirits that we have already lived with in the most current life, or even more ancient lives that we have lived. So what you're doing today in this incarnation right now is going to be impactful to what's going to happen to you and to those spirits as we move on. And as Kardec says, if love towards one's neighbor is the principle of charity, loving one's enemy is the sublime application. For such a virtue is one of the greatest victories attainable over selfishness and pride. Pretty words. It's a victory over selfishness and pride. But is it really selfish to try to not love somebody who's constantly hitting us? Maybe someone who abuses us. Domestic violence, for example. A spouse is somehow hurting another spouse. Somebody is hurting our children. How can we love that person? And yet Jesus says, not only you can, but you must. Does that mean we're going to be able to achieve that in this current stage that we are at? Not likely. So what are we to do? We can't be that noble. We can't reach that level. What are the things that we can do? Well, the first thing we need to do is understand what love means. Like, what does it mean to love? Is Jesus saying that we must love our enemies the same way that I love my wife, or I love my children, love my family, my best friends? That's not it. It's not that kind of love. Jesus did not mean by this word that one must have for one's enemy the tenderness that one would have for a brother, sister, or friend. Love presupposes trust. Isn't that true? I mean, in some cases we love regardless, but in essence, if we're giving heart of our feelings or soul to those who we love, we trust that they will receive that in good spirit. And hopefully, we always hope that they will get some of that back. It's not necessary, but let's be honest, that's what we're expecting as well. And the more the other person loves you, the more you love them back. So it becomes kind of a positive cycle of love. And how can we trust somebody who is harming us? We can't. The only thing that we can trust is that they will likely continue the harm they're doing to us. So how can we feel pleasure of being with them? We don't want to be close. The way that we want to be close to our friends, to those we love. I always kind of jokingly say that Jesus tells us to love everyone, but doesn't mean we have to like them. Right? Like is kind of a meeting of our principles, meeting of our what we find important in life, meeting of our mutual respect. These are the people we like. And we can't like somebody who's harming us, who's harming somebody we love. But God still wants us to love them. Why? Because we have to see them in the nature that we are. They're equally to us. There are spirits that are still learning. Right? How can you have hatred for a child that's misbehaving? You see them as somebody that needs our direction, needs our attention. And if that child is yours, you have lots of patience. If this child is somebody at the restaurant whose parents are not taking care of them, you might have a different opinion. But in the same way, you blame the parents. You don't blame the child for what they're misbehaving. The same is true for the spirits, our enemies, who are here in their own selfish goals that they're trying to, along the way, learn what we may have already learned a little bit better than they. And thus, we have to understand that and be patient with that in a loving way. Now, how do we demonstrate that love? What's the simplest way to demonstrate that love for them? We pray. We pray for them to see the light. And the light might be the wrongness in their ways. It may not happen. They might be too hardened on their path. They might feel they have no way to come back because they've already done too much. So they have no other alternative but to continue in their vicious kind of manners or ways. But we still can pray. Praying is always good. Praying gives us good energy because we're connecting with the higher spirits, with God Himself, and asking for goodness to happen to the others, because there's always a hope that if some of this good energy is reaching our enemies, maybe they will not need to continue acting the way they do. Maybe they will feel less need to harm others. Here at the TSS, we have a mediumship group, and we receive communications or dialogues with spirits of all natures. And often we see a lot of these spirits who have discarnated and have remained in the umbral for centuries. Why? Because they have been harboring hatred, the need of revenge for those who have harmed him or her. They want to somehow harm those spirits. They don't even know what those spirits are anymore. They might have been very likely, obviously, they have also died and moved on, and they have other things. But it's that hatred, that desire for vengeance has kept them in the lower levels of vibration of the spirit, which prevents them from moving on, prevents them from enjoying what is more kind of what is most great in this existence that God has created us, which is the ability to continue to evolve, to learn, to become better through multiple lives. They're kind of stuck in the mud, if you may, because they don't want to give it up. Their hatred is stronger than the love of the spirits that try to help them out. Eventually, they do start to mellow. They do start to wean a bit of that hatred, that negative energy that's dragging them down, and then they can finally be brought to our mediumship table for us to help them move yet a little bit closer, a little bit higher, so they can be helped by the spirits that are working. If you had a chance to read the books of André Luiz, there's a lot of explanations of how this happens. And we have our own first-hand experience of how that is so true. How this need to let go. Sometimes they have to let go of other things, like their vices or their kind of excessive, possessive love of others. But more often than not, it is the hatred that they carry that holds them back the longest. Because that's the toughest one to let go. Right? Either because they were killed by someone, this is the most obvious one, but in the case of a father who has a hatred for a man who took away his daughter from him and made it a misery of her life. So hatred in this case is the opposite of love. So if you don't hate to such extent that those who have harmed you, you're giving yourself a big lift, giving yourself more chances to overcome the period that we have to stay in the umbral before we can be elevated to the next levels that we want to be. So actually loving, or even not hating, let's start with that. That's an easier step than loving, is the not hating part. Again, we're all students in this path of evolution. So the first lesson is let's not hate. We can be angry at them. We can defend ourselves, absolutely, right? We can ask for the legal kind of consequences in the kind of the material world that we live in. All of these are fair. But it's that utter hate that basically is a poison that eats you from the inside out. You're not sending that hate to the other person. to the other spirit. You're not. That energy, all of that vile thoughts that you have are within you, only in you. And it's basically kind of just eroding all of the other good thoughts you could be having. You fill your soul with that anger and that hate, and leaves no space for the love, for the attention, for the really important things that we have to do in life. So not hating seems to be a good step. Now, Kardec continues explaining a little bit about this battle that we have with our enemies. It says that this sentiment results from a physical law, the law of assimilation and repulsion of fluids. So often we are attracted to people because we are in the same vibration, we have common fluids, we have affinity, and we become, quote, enemies of those who are opposite to us. A malevolent thought emits a fluidic current whose impression is painful. A benevolent thought envelopes you in a pleasant emanation. That's what I was just saying. All of these, what he calls a malevolent thought, are basically harming us. It's painful to the soul. Our hate hides the pain, but the pain is there, and it's being imprinted in our very spirit. Every one of those thoughts, every one of those kind of painful experiences that we're reliving over and over again. So to love one's enemies, therefore, cannot mean that one should not make a difference between them and your own friends. This seems difficult, even impossible to practice. Yeah, it is, depending on what it is. And I don't know everybody's life story, but I do know that our life stories are not the worst case scenarios. We're not involved in war. I don't think we are. We have not experienced utter losses through violence. Maybe some of you have, but so our enemies are far less evil to us than a lot of people are experiencing today in the wars and the conflicts that exist around the world. We are not experiencing the death of a child because of starvation, because of these wars. So imagine that there are people that have much stronger reason to have that hatred. They can actually span millenniums, centuries, generations. That's being carried from parents to children. See how harmful that is. It just keeps in this never-ending cycle among peoples, groups, clans. So Kardec says it only seems impossible because people have wrongly believed that it prescribes giving friends and enemies the same place in their hearts. Yeah, we've talked about that. We'll never be the same, obviously, because we like the people we like. To love one's enemy, therefore, does not mean holding for them an affection that's not natural. It means holding neither hatred, rancor, nor desires for vengeance against them. So that is what love is. It's not having this desire for their destruction, either by us, which is the ultimate vengeance, that I will be able to somehow inflict to them the same pain that they have inflicted to us. Or at the very least, I'm hoping that somebody else does the dirty job for me. Doesn't make a difference. Doesn't make a difference to your soul whether you design your own hands-on vengeance or that you'll be happy to have somebody else do it for you because they deserve it. So loving your enemy first begins by not having hatred, praying for them, and actually hoping that they can be happy. In a lot of cases, their anger stems from their own unhappiness. And also means forgiving them. And here's another hard part, it's the forgiveness. Unconditionally and without ulterior motives. Yeah. How can we forgive somebody who has killed our child? Maybe they have not done nothing else to be our enemies, nothing else. That's the only thing they did. How not have hatred for them? How to forgive them unconditionally for what they have done, what they have taken away from us, destroy the future that we would have with that child. It also means that abstaining either in word or act from anything that might harm them, right? It means repaying their evil with good, in everything with no intention of humiliating them. That's the other thing. Sometimes we think, oh, I'm going to be bigger than this person. And then you have a chance to humiliate them publicly. Oh, that's a vengeance. You're getting back at them, right? Just making yourself look superior actually makes you look very inferior. So believing, loving one's enemy is something that Karacha says is absurd to any disbelievers. If you don't have a spiritual context, you have almost animal instincts to rely back on. An animal that's attacked will attack back, right? Humans that are harmed will harm back, right? And this is where Spiritism helps us a lot, because it brings to us a certainty, or the fear, if you may put it a different way, that this life is not it. The first thing you got to think, if we've had multiple lives before, and our enemies had multiple lives before, and as I said before, by the laws of affinity, we might have lived at the same time and interacted with those same enemies in the past. Who's to say that we were not the abuser in the past? Who's to say that we have not been the ones who harmed them in a previous life, and they now have come back, and now they have a chance to get back at us because they have not learned to love their enemies, and they're coming back to harm us. So you see the cycle. If we do harm to them again, guess what's going to happen on the next lives when we come together again? Right? Maybe it's going to be our ability to harm them, and it never ends. And we're just basically destroying each other's opportunity, because we don't destroy the soul, we destroy the opportunity to evolve, because it's keeping us in this kind of cycle of emotions that are so negative. So this is, again, in terms of our humility, which Spiritism also teaches us, don't assume this just because in this life we seem to be holding the higher moral ground, does not mean that these things were totally different in a previous experience. It is a bit of a kind of a presumption that in the world that we live today, and we know that in Spiritism, worlds evolve as well as spirits, and they tend to hold spirits that are similar in their progression, in their evolution. If we go back 2,000 years, 3,000 years, how humans lived and how we practice our societies, we can see that we evolved quite a bit. But in the ultimate, if you think that this is how much we have to evolve, the range that we have in this world in terms of the spirits, we're almost kind of a thin slice in terms of our evolution. So no matter how much you think you are much better than other people or other spirits you think are so inferior to us, in the bigger picture, they're as close as we can get to them. We have done much harm. We have learned to those things, and hopefully we are getting better. But somebody has to break those cycles of continuous feuds, battles, right? Somehow this has to be broken. And the only way to achieve that is the forgiveness. Unconditional forgiveness. seeing in that other person someone who could have done better. And we will suffer the consequences for that. And it's not up to us, to provide that judgment and that punishment. And this is fundamental basis for us to forgive and pray for them. Because we have to believe that they will suffer their own kind of consequences for the acts they're doing as they discarnate. There is always a bigger justice. If we don't have faith in that bigger justice, then we can't practice any of this. Because we believe then that we are the ones who need to provide that justice. We have to believe in the actual divine ways of using the consequences of everyone's acts to help us evolve, learn. Now, I was saying about the umbral, about spirits that carry them such hatred and desire for vengeance, how they will spend hundreds of years in that suffering, in the darkness that they create. Remember, the umbral is not a place that exists for, like, it's like everybody is there and everybody's together. It's actually a creation of our own spirit. It is the sum of our own thoughts, our own energy, and our own guilt for what we have done wrong. And this is the interesting part. No matter what we believe here and what we do here, deep down, we know what's right and wrong. And this becomes even clearer once we discarnate and we are kind of detached from the material distractions of this physical world. And all we have is ourselves, our spirit. It's like when we go to bed at night and we're in the dark. And there's nobody that you're going to be faking for. There's no mask you have to wear. It's just you. And you somehow start thinking about the things you've done. And hoping that things were different. That's the time that we can actually connect to ourselves more deeply. And this becomes multiplied many times we're in umbral. So if you have an enemy who you know has harmed you, pray for them. Pray for them to minimize somehow the suffering that they will have, because it is inevitable. They will punish themselves in umbral. And that's the only way that we learn. That's the only way that we evolve. So we are not here to replace that divine justice or to act on it. As I said, it's perfectly okay for us for self-defense. Nobody's saying that you're not allowed to defend yourself. But once that moment of interaction, of violence, whatever is over, you have to deal with the feelings you have with your enemies. And all that Jesus is asking us to do is don't let those feelings remain in you. Now, I've talked about violence and death. The reality is that we have little enemies that do little harm to us, but it still annoys us, right? The colleague that took a promotion, right? The person who took our lover, right? They become enemies. And you can harbor that resentment for many years, maybe sometimes for the rest of your life. And who are you harming? Not them. It's harming you. If somebody tricked themselves into getting a promotion, what are you going to do? You're going to be just wishing them, finding ways to bring them down. And I can tell you that if that's what you try to do, you might bring them down. They will never lift you. You will go down with them. Right? Are you going to get back that lover that you had? No. Why would they come back to you after all the harm that you're trying to do with them? Same thing is in this notion that we're at the same time having to understand the weight and our own guilt that we carried from previous lives, and how we can avoid having this continuing in the next lives. Always manage your negative emotions very carefully. Right? You don't have to remember, oh, I did all of this good. I was cheerful today. It was nice to the person who walked by the street. Yeah, that's fine, but that's not the important things. Important things is when you go to bed and you think about your day, think of the things you did not do right, or the things you could have done better, or even the thoughts you had against another person. Jealousy, envy, anger, a desire to correct something that was done harm against you. These are signs that you are not loving all of our brothers and sisters in that sense. Pray for them. Pray for yourself that you might not do these things anymore. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying here this is easy. I'm actually saying the opposite. This is the most difficult thing in my sense that Jesus has asked us to do. Because it goes against every instinct that we have inside. And we know that our evolution is moving from instincts to full consciousness. A consciousness based on loving, not destroying or hating. If it was easy, then we will be almost there. And we're not almost there, I'm sorry to say. Again, but it doesn't mean that we can't do better, that we can't at least recognize when we did not meet that higher criteria. And we could have done better. It doesn't mean that somebody comes to you and they're trying to harm you, that you're going to try to pull them down and kind of humiliate them against this facet. That's not intent. It's imagine them as a spirit that's suffering. And somehow that pain that they have inside is coming out as an aggression towards you. And our role, whatever small it is, whatever little we can do, is to help them understand that it's not hitting us the way they would like us to hit, and that we're in fact hoping that they can overcome that pain so they don't have to do this to us or to others. Let's see what else Kardec tells us here. Well, then he talks about the other enemies that we don't see. All the discarnated spirits. Everything I said up to now, describing people that we live with or interact with in this life, is happening with spirits that are not here in flesh. If we had disagreements, we had enemies in the past, and we're here and they're still discarnated, guess what? They could be close to us. They could be affecting your day-to-day life. They could be the ones that somehow are experiencing the consequences of their act. And if they still harbor some resentment or kind of ill thoughts towards you, remember, misery loves company. So they're the little devil in the shoulder that's asking you to do the vengeance, the revenge, the evil acts. Why? They're not going to get the satisfaction of the act, but they would get the satisfaction knowing that you have to pay for those acts later on. That you will suffer what they may be suffering now. So when you pray, pray not only for the enemies you see, pray for the enemies you don't see. Pray for those who have harmed you and are discarnated. But more importantly, pray for those who you have harmed and are discarnated now. Because we're not saints here. Even in our lives, sometimes we harm people without even realizing the impact that we're having in their lives. So let's, again, focus on our humility, that we're not perfect, we're not great, we're not better. And then the more we recognize these little faults, these small transgressions in our day-to-day life, the more we be able to police ourselves. Anything you learn doesn't come natural. You have to learn. That's why we have to learn. And in the beginning, you have to force yourself to learn until it becomes kind of automatic for us. Right? I think in sports and in music, there's this notion about muscle memory, right? That after you practice something so many times, it just happens. You're not even thinking about which muscle you have to move or what actions you have to do. You just do it. It just comes natural. And this is what we're trying to do here. And for that, loving thy neighbor is the difficult challenge that we have in this life. It is the full demonstration of our charity, right? Without charity, there's no salvation. Like we said, it's very easy to be charitable to your lovers, to people you love, to your family, to your friends. It's very charitable to be. It's very easy to be charitable to people who are in need, who are hungry. That you send money, you go and do your stuff. How can you be charitable to the people who are trying to kill you, to destroy you, to destroy your way of life, whenever you see that? How difficult is that? How difficult is to be charitable to the person who wants to stop you from progressing in your job, or kind of tore you away from the people you like? That is the real final demonstration of unconditional love memory, if you want. It's automatic. Again, you don't have to like everyone. We don't. We're different. We like certain things and we dislike others. It is part of our nature. But imagine that we're in a huge family with one father, right? We have to love one another because the time may come where your enemies will come and be part of saving you. Sometime, someday, in the future, in the incarnated world or discarnated state, they might be the ones who are coming to take us, drag us out of the umbral, out of that mud, to help us overcome the consequences of our own actions. And then there's the famous passage from Jesus that we hear, and people, especially a lot of non-believers, hate this. And Jesus says, you have learned that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. I'm telling you not to resist the evil that others might want to do to you. But if someone strikes your right cheek, offer him the other. Also, if someone wants to sue you, to take your tunic, leave him your cloak. Also, if someone wants to force you to go 1,000 steps with him, go 2,000. Give to him who asks, and do not turn away someone who wants to borrow from you. Matthew, again, chapter 5. Wow. So does this mean that Jesus is telling us to ignore our self-preservation? No. And Kardec explains this, that we must not take this maxim literally. No more than the one that says to pluck out an eye if it's a cause of a scandal. That's another passage in the Bible, right? If you're part of a scandal, take your eyes out. Taken to the extreme, it would mean condoning all repression, even when legal, and will leave the field free to evil persons by removing all of their fear. So what is really being said is that by these words, Jesus did not interdict self-defense, but condemn vengeance. So he does not want you to strike the other person's cheek. That's really what he's telling us. That we must be kind of loving to that person. Only in faith is the future love in God's justice, which never leaves injustice unpunished, can provide the strength to bear patiently the blows directed against our interests and self-centeredness. Again, this is the proof of faith. If you don't have faith, that that person will get what they're coming for, what the consequences of their act. That they will never be punished. They will just be happy and move on, and they will get all of the rewards of this life and future lives. If you don't believe in divine justice, all of this that I've been saying here for about 45 minutes will mean nothing. Just empty words, silly words of something that's impossible. Because we have nobody else to rely on but ourselves. And this is where we come as spiritists to try to bring that faith that the divine justice is inevitable. And we experience this through the ministry of communications. Nobody escapes the consequences of their actions. Not in this life, not in other lives. Sometimes you pay for it. The longer it takes for you to get the consequences, the more severe they will come to you. The more difficult it will be for you to overcome. This may come in a form of a very difficult life in the future, where you will be subject to the violence that you have portrayed in the past. Some people call this karma. We don't call karma in spiritism. It's just action and reaction. This means paying your dues for the abuse and the fact that you have broken laws. Which laws are we talking about? We're talking about the divine laws, the laws that God has given us. And as we break them, there is no escape from that justice. And God thinks in very long times. He's very patient. He doesn't have to have it immediately. It doesn't have to be in this life, the next life. There's an equation that we don't know. There's a bookkeeping somewhere about our lives that we are not aware. But be sure that all of those debts are recorded. So if we want to help ourselves, so that's the selfish view, we're helping ourselves of not having bigger debts. Let's try to break these cycles of hatred and revenge and enemies going from lives to lives. But the better way to looking is, it is by helping others. We're helping others evolve as well. And why is this important? Well, I say this analogy very, very often. So for those who have heard it before, my apologies. I see our evolution as spirits, as us going up this infinite ladder towards a heavenly place. Our ladder is just for us. It's our ladder. We have to scale it. We have to learn how to take each rut one at a time and go up. Each person has their own ladder. So imagine this view of the sky and billions of ladders, each one with a person going up. That's not hard. Now imagine that you have a rope attached to your foot, connected to the foot of another person that's closest to you. And the rope is finite, right? So you have a problem that you can only go up as far as the other person is close to you, right? So the other person is not going up with you. You're not going up either. You're stuck. So you have to help that person, right? Now imagine that you're not connected to one person. You're connected to every person in those infinite ladders. For us to go up, we have to bring everyone up, right? So as we follow these maxims, as we follow these lessons that are so simple, they're one phrase: love thy neighbor, love thy enemy, love yourself, love God. Very simple. Yeah. In practice, we have to work at it. We have to work at it every day. And with everybody's help, we all go up the ladders. Thank you. Any questions? Comments? Who are you hating today? Yes.
Ju, you mentioned about forgive, right?
Forgiveness, yes.
I don't think that mentioned about forget, right? So someone told me once that it's like a forgive, it's an active, it's an action, and you choose. You choose to forget, right? Forget just happened. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Well, in one aspect, our soul, our spirit never forgets. We're the sum of every experience, good and bad, that we have practiced and has been done upon us. From our current spirit, forgetting is basically, if you think we're like I'm an IT guy, so pardon me here. You have multiple types of memories. You have short-term memory, you have kind of slow memories. By forgetting means that we have pushed those events to the lower and lower, farthest away memory banks that we have. It's there someplace, and sometimes something will trigger you and you will recover that memory. But what it means that we have replaced that bad memory with a whole bunch of good memories. They become more important. They take up all of the short-term memory that we need, and that's what we think, that's what we live, that's what we experience every day. All of those bad memories, I don't say they're buried or forgotten, but they're put in a place of very little importance within our spirit. Sometimes we don't want to forget because that experience maybe made us stronger, right? That experience maybe we want to forget, we don't want to forget how we had so much hatred at that time and we were able to overcome the hatred. What we want to forget in some ways is all of those negative feelings we had at the time. And we can look at those memories more from a abstract kind of non-emotional point of view as something that A, it happened to us, and B, probably we needed to happen to us. Was something that it was kind of necessary for us to learn something, no matter how painful that lesson would have been. Kind of dark lecture today, but that's anything else? Any other comments? Well, first of all, thank everyone for coming here tonight. The house is full. It's always a fantastic pleasure to see us. And I hope you all can stay.
Yes, for sure. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for those who join us online. We are going to get ready for our classes. Thank you. Have a blessed week. And yeah,